Emily was 27, and though life hadn't exactly been kind, she carried herself like someone who still believed in goodness. She worked the night shift at a small diner just outside Detroit, one of those old-time places with flickering neon lights, cracked leather booths, and a coffee pot that never seemed to stop brewing. Most nights, it was quiet. A few regulars might drift in for a late-night slice of pie or a cup of decaf, but more often than not, the place felt like a time capsule, paused somewhere in the past, waiting for the world to catch up. Emily didn't mind the quiet. She moved through the empty aisles with practiced ease, wiping down counters, checking the salt shakers, humming to herself as the jukebox played old country songs in the background. She treated each customer with care, no matter how rough they looked or how late they showed up. A warm smile, a fresh cup of coffee, and a little kindness, those were things she believed still mattered, even if no one was watching. She lived alone in a small second-floor apartment, just a 10-minute bus ride from the diner. It wasn't much, peeling wallpaper, thin walls, a heater that rattled when it worked, but it was hers. Most of her paycheck went straight to the hospital, where her mother had been undergoing long-term treatment for over a year now. Cancer. The word hung in her life like a heavy curtain, ever-present, suffocating at times, but Emily carried it with quiet strength. She didn't talk about it unless someone asked, and even then, she kept her answers short. "She's fighting," she'd say with a soft nod. "And I'm fighting with her." Dinner for Emily came after the last customer left and the closed sign was flipped over. The kitchen staff would have cleaned up by then, but they always left her a plate. Nothing fancy, maybe meatloaf and mashed potatoes, or grilled cheese with tomato soup, but it was warm, and it was hers. She'd take her plate to the counter by the window, where she could look out at the quiet street and let her thoughts wander. That meal, simple as it was, had become her favorite part of the day. It was the only time she truly sat down, breathed, and let the world slow down around her. Most people might have looked at Emily and only seen a waitress, tired eyes, calloused hands, apron dusted with flour. But there was more to her. Beneath the routine and the weariness, there lived a heart that still hoped, still gave, even when it had little left to offer. And on one cold winter night, that quiet kindness, so often unnoticed, would be seen. And everything would change. It was nearly midnight when the front door creaked open, letting in a gust of icy wind that swept through the diner like a ghost. Emily looked up from her meal, meatloaf and mashed potatoes, still steaming on her plate, and instinctively pulled her cardigan tighter around her shoulders. The wind carried something else with it that night, a presence. A figure stood in the doorway, silhouetted against the snow that was falling hard now, the flakes catching in the yellow glow of the street lamp just outside. The woman stepped inside slowly, almost uncertainly, like she wasn't sure she belonged. Her coat, if it could even be called that, was threadbare and soaked through, clinging to her thin frame. Her shoes were mismatched, the soles worn down to nearly nothing. Her face was pale, lips trembling, eyes wide and tired. She looked like she hadn't slept in days. Emily could feel the cold radiating off her from across the room. The woman took a shaky breath and looked toward the counter where Emily sat. Do you have anything hot?" she whispered, her voice so soft it nearly got lost in the low hum of the heater. "I'm cold. And I'm so hungry." Emily stood up slowly, her chair scraping lightly against the floor. The diner was technically closed, lights dimmed, register shut, and the kitchen had gone dark half an hour ago. The cook had already left, and everything else had been packed up for the night. Everything, except her own plate. It sat there now, barely touched, still warm. She looked at the woman again, really looked. The chapped skin, the hollow cheeks, the way her hands clutched at each other as if trying to generate any warmth they could. Emily didn't hesitate. "Hold on, I'll see what I can do," she said gently, her voice steady. She picked up her plate and carried it to the small microwave behind the counter. As it whirred to life, Emily reached into her cubby under the register and pulled out a scarf, a knitted wool one her mom had given her years ago. She hesitated for a second, then brought it with her. When the food was warm again, She placed it carefully on a tray along with a steaming cup of ginger tea she brewed from the staff stash. She set it down on the corner booth closest to the radiator. "Here," she said softly. "It's not much, but it's hot." The woman stared at the plate like she couldn't believe it was real. Her eyes welled with tears as she sat down, murmuring a thank you that caught in her throat. Emily wrapped the scarf gently around her shoulders. "You need this more than I do," she said, smiling faintly. For a long moment, there was only silence, the kind that hangs in the air when something meaningful is happening, even if no one speaks. The woman ate slowly, hands trembling, tears occasionally spilling onto her cheeks. Emily didn't ask questions. She just sat across from her, sipping tea, offering company. A few scattered words were exchanged. The woman had once had a job, a family, even a house. But life, as it often does, had taken unexpected turns, and somewhere along the way, she lost it all. The snow continued to fall outside, blanketing the street in white. Inside that tiny diner, though, there was warmth, a quiet moment of human grace. Emily didn't know it yet, but someone else had seen what happened that night. Someone sitting in the shadows, nursing a cup of black coffee. And everything, soon enough, would change. Emily didn't think twice. She carried the steaming plate to the woman, careful not to spill the mashed potatoes sliding off the side, and placed it gently on the corner table. A moment later, she added the cup of ginger tea, something she usually saved for when her throat hurt after long shifts of calling orders and laughing politely with strangers. Tonight, it felt like it belonged to someone else. "There you go," she said softly. "It's not much, but it's warm." The woman stared at the tray like it was a dream. Her hands trembled as she reached for the fork. She hadn't even sat down yet, as if she couldn't quite believe this was real. Emily offered a quiet nod toward the booth. "You can sit. Take your time." And then, without a word, Emily stepped around the counter and took off the scarf around her own neck. It was a thick, deep green wool scarf, faded a bit now, but still warm. Her mother had knit it years ago, back when she still had the strength to hold needles and hum Christmas songs under her breath. Emily bent down and wrapped it gently around the woman's shoulders. "You need it more than I do," she murmured. For a second, the woman froze. Her fork hovered above the plate, and her lips parted, but no words came out. Then her shoulders began to shake, first lightly, then uncontrollably. She cried quietly, the kind of crying that comes from deep in the chest, where hunger meets heartbreak. She kept eating in between sobs, her cheeks wet, her breath catching. It wasn't graceful. It wasn't pretty. But it was honest. And Emily didn't look away. She slid into the seat across from her, hands wrapped around her own tea, and just sat there. Present. No rush. No pressure. No small talk, unless the woman wanted it. After a few minutes, words began to trickle out. Broken sentences, out of order, pieces of a life scattered like fallen leaves. The woman's name was Clara. She'd once been a receptionist at a dentist's office. She had a daughter, now grown. There was a fire. Insurance didn't cover enough. Then came the job loss, the eviction, the shelters. Somewhere along the way, she lost more than just things. She lost the thread of who she used to be. "I used to be someone people looked in the eye," Clara whispered, barely audible over the whir of the coffee machine. "Now, they act like I'm invisible." Emily didn't respond right away. She just looked at her. Really looked. And when she finally spoke, it was quiet and full of something rare, respect. "You still are someone," she said. "And tonight, you're not invisible." There was no dramatic music, no spotlight, no audience to applaud. Just the hum of a heater, the clink of a fork on a chipped plate, and two women sharing a moment in the corner of a near-empty diner. Outside, the snow kept falling. Inside, something warmer than heat filled the room. Emily had given away her meal and her scarf. But what she gave Clara that night was something even deeper: dignity. A reminder that she still mattered. And though Emily didn't know it yet, Someone had seen it all. Someone who had the power to change everything. In the farthest booth, nestled beneath a flickering open late sign that cast long shadows against the windowpane, a man sat quietly with a mug of black coffee cradled between his hands. He was dressed simply, dark jeans, a worn wool coat, a navy ball cap pulled low over his brow. To anyone else, he looked like a truck driver pausing for a midnight refill, or maybe a local who liked his coffee plain and his silence uninterrupted. No one paid him much mind. Not Emily, not Clara. That was exactly how he preferred it. His name was Elliot Chambers. Most wouldn't recognize him, and that was by design. A self-made billionaire who built his fortune in technology and quietly stepped away from the public eye 5 years ago, Elliot had long since traded boardrooms and press conferences for unmarked travel and modest solitude. He wasn't the type to chase headlines. In fact, he'd spent millions ensuring he wouldn't appear in them. And yet here he was, alone in a near-empty diner on the snowy outskirts of Detroit, watching. It had started as a routine. Whenever he finished a meeting in the city, especially the exhausting kind where people spoke in circles and numbers danced around morality, Elliot liked to take a detour. Something about late-night diners comforted him. The honest smell of grease and coffee. The echo of old songs drifting from a forgotten jukebox. The kind of places where people didn't pretend to be anyone they weren't. Tonight, he'd pulled into the lot on a whim, brushing snow off his coat as he entered, asking for just coffee, thanks with a nod. He'd planned to sit a few minutes, collect his thoughts, and then disappear into the night like always. But then he saw Emily. He noticed her when she brought out her own dinner, moving like someone used to long hours and little praise. There was something about the way she took her time, even when the room was empty, that made Elliot pause mid-sip. He watched her sit down, fork in hand, shoulders slightly slumped, exhaustion evident. And then Clara had walked in. Elliot's eyes followed every moment, the way Emily stood, the way she listened, the way she gave without asking anything in return. Not a flicker of hesitation. She gave her food. Her scarf. Her presence. It wasn't showy or performative. It was instinctive. Real. He watched the two women share tea and soft conversation, saw the fragile lines of trust form across the table. And in that quiet, intimate corner of humanity, Elliot felt something shift. Something he hadn't felt in a long time. He'd spent years surrounded by people who wanted something from him. Deals, favors, access, clout. But this was something purer. No one knew who he was. No one was trying to impress him. They were just being kind. For no other reason than kindness itself. He looked down at his coffee, now lukewarm, and let the silence stretch a little longer. Elliot had built empires, sat at the helm of companies with global reach, but nothing he'd seen in boardrooms or private jets held a candle to what he'd just witnessed in that booth by the radiator. A tired waitress sharing her last meal with someone colder, hungrier, and forgotten. He didn't know her name yet. But he would. The next evening, the snow had softened into a gentle flurry, dusting the sidewalks and diner awning in a fresh coat of white. Inside, the diner was just as quiet as the night before. The same hum of the heater, the same low hum of the jukebox playing a tune from 3 decades ago. Emily was wiping down the counter when the bell above the door chimed. She glanced up. It was the man from the corner booth, the one who had sat silently with his coffee the night before, nearly forgotten in the swirl of everything that had happened. He looked the same, simple coat, ball cap, calm eyes. He walked in without fanfare and made his way to the exact same seat, sliding into the booth like he'd been doing it for years. Emily approached him with the worn leather menu, though she didn't expect he'd need it. "Evening," she greeted with a polite smile. "Back for more of our famous burnt coffee?" He chuckled softly. "Something like that." He paused, eyes scanning her face. "I'll take whatever you think is good tonight." "Dangerous choice," she replied with a grin. "I've got opinions." She brought him a plate, pot roast with carrots and gravy, plus a roll on the side. Just the kind of thing that warmed a person from the inside out. She set it down, refilled his coffee, and turned to leave when he spoke again, his voice quieter this time. "Do you often help strangers like that?" he asked. Emily paused, turning slightly. Her eyes narrowed with a flicker of recognition. He had seen. He had been watching. She shrugged lightly, not embarrassed, not proud, just honest. "I don't know," she said. "I don't plan it. Sometimes someone walks in and they're cold, and they're hungry. And if I've got something warm to give, I do." He nodded, letting her words hang in the air a moment. Then he asked, "Even if it's your last meal of the day?" Emily smiled, a soft thing that barely reached the corners of her mouth, but was full of something real. "If it's the last meal I have," she said, "I'd still rather share it with someone hungrier than me." She didn't say it like it was profound. She said it like it was obvious. Like it wasn't even a choice, just the right thing to do. Elliot studied her for a moment longer, then looked down at his plate. He didn't press her with more questions. He didn't need to. The truth of who she was had already been written in her actions the night before. Emily walked away to tend to another table, leaving him alone with his meal and his thoughts. And for the second night in a row, Elliot Chambers, man of power, wealth, and influence, found himself feeling something rare in this world: reverence. He'd spent his life building walls to keep people out. But this young woman, without even knowing it, had walked straight through them. He looked down at the pot roast, steam curling into the air, and for the first time in years, dinner didn't feel routine. It felt like a turning point. The diner was quiet again by the time Elliot finished his meal. A few regulars had trickled out, leaving behind the smell of fried onions and the distant hum of the jukebox. Emily was behind the counter, stacking plates and wiping down the coffee machine. The evening rush, what little there was of it, had passed. The snow outside had turned the streets into soft white ribbons, and the windows were fogged from the warmth inside. Elliot placed his fork down neatly on the edge of his empty plate. The pot roast was gone, the gravy soaked up by the last piece of bread. He sipped the final mouthful of his coffee and reached into his coat pocket. From it, he pulled out a thick cream-colored envelope, no name written on it, no logo or return address. Just a single fold of paper inside, and something heavier, a check. He glanced toward the counter. Emily was laughing softly at something the dishwasher had said, completely unaware. She looked tired, but there was still a lightness in her face, something gentle and hopeful that hadn't been dulled by long hours or hard days. Elliot stood, adjusted his coat, and slid the envelope beneath the edge of the plate, just enough so it would catch the light when the dishes were cleared. He didn't say a word. He didn't wave goodbye. He simply nodded once toward Emily when she looked up, offered a polite thanks for dinner, and stepped out into the cold. Emily didn't find the envelope until several minutes later. She was clearing the booth like she always did, stacking dishes, wiping down the table, reaching instinctively beneath the plate for stray tips. But instead of a crumpled bill or a quarter, her fingers brushed against something heavier. She picked up the envelope, eyebrows pinched in curiosity. It wasn't sealed, just folded neatly. She opened it slowly. Inside was a check. Not for $20. Not for a generous $175,000. Her breath caught. She stared at the number, heart pounding. The name at the top corner read Chambers, and her mind began to race, but before she could fully process the magnitude of it, her eyes landed on the slip of paper tucked alongside it. A note, handwritten in clean, simple script. "I witnessed something rare last night. Genuine kindness. No stage, no audience. Use this to continue doing what the world so desperately needs." Emily read it twice. Then a third time. Her hands trembled. She looked up, as if he might still be standing there at the door. But of course, he was gone. The man in the corner booth, with the quiet eyes and the ball cap pulled low, had vanished as quietly as he'd arrived. It was the kind of moment that didn't feel real until much later, when the envelope was tucked in her coat pocket, when she was alone in her apartment, staring at her mother's medical bills stacked on the counter. Even then, she wasn't sure whether to cry or to laugh. But one thing was certain, someone had seen her. Not just her name tag, not her apron, not the motions of a waitress doing her job, but her heart. Her choice to give, even when she had almost nothing left to give. And now, that kindness was coming back to her in a way she never imagined. Emily didn't waste time. The very next morning, she went to the hospital and settled the balance that had weighed on her shoulders for over a year. Her mother cried when she heard the news, clutching Emily's hands with a kind of disbelief that could only come from someone who'd grown too used to life saying no. With the rest of the money, Emily didn't buy a new car or take a vacation. Instead, she took a leap. 3 months later, with a little help from friends, some saved up overtime, and more than a few late nights of sanding tables and repainting walls, the kind table opened its doors. It was small, just 12 seats, an old stove, and a bell that jingled sweetly every time someone walked in. But it wasn't about size. It was about heart. And Emily had more of that than most people twice her age. There was a simple sign out front. Good food. No judgment. Pay if you can. Eat if you need. Every day, they served a rotating menu of hot meals. Nothing fancy, just things that warmed you from the inside. Stew on Mondays. Chicken and rice on Wednesdays. And every night, once the rush was over and the tables had been wiped clean, Emily would make herself a plate and sit by the window. Just like she always used to. But now, she was never alone. Sometimes a college kid would join her, grateful for a meal that didn't come in a styrofoam box. Other nights, it was an older man who'd lost his job, or a mother with 2 kids and nowhere else to go. They'd eat together. They'd talk. Or they'd sit in silence and watch the city lights blink beyond the fogged-up glass. On the back wall of the cafe, above a shelf of mismatched mugs and paper napkin dispensers, there hung a hand-painted sign. Just one sentence, written in Emily's careful cursive. Even if it's your last meal, let it be the kindest one you serve. It had no name beneath it. No attribution. Just a quiet truth left for anyone who needed to hear it. Emily never heard from Elliot Chambers again. But sometimes when she looked at the people around her, laughing, eating, breathing easier, she felt like maybe he hadn't really disappeared at all. Maybe he was still there, somewhere in the kindness being passed from plate to plate, hand to hand. And every time she gave someone a warm meal, she remembered that cold winter night. And how a simple act of grace, offered without expectation, had changed everything. Sometimes, the smallest act of kindness leaves the deepest mark. Emily didn't have much, just a warm meal, a worn scarf, and a heart that hadn't given up on compassion. Yet in offering what little she had to a stranger, she changed 2 lives, the woman's and her own. This story reminds us that true generosity doesn't require wealth or status. It simply asks us to care. To notice the people others pass by. To share when it's easier to keep. As we grow older, we often reflect on what truly mattered in our lives. And more often than not, it's not the things we owned, but the kindness we gave. Emily's choice was quiet, unseen, except by someone who could amplify it. But even if no one had been watching, it still would have meant everything. That's the beauty of grace. It multiplies in silence. So whether you're young or old, rich or poor, remember this. Your kindness might be the moment someone else never forgets. And maybe, just maybe, it'll come back to you when you least expect it.